This is Aging Forward, a podcast from Mayo Clinic about the science behind healthy aging and longevity. Each episode, we explore new ways to take care of our long-term health, the health of our loved ones, and our community, so we can all live longer and better. I'm Dr. Christina Chen, a geriatrician and internist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. In this episode, we are talking about nutrition and healthy aging, fueling longevity, eating well to age well. And our guest is Tara Schmidt, who is a registered dietitian and instructor of nutrition at Mayo Clinic. She's also the lead dietitian and co-author of the Mayo Clinic Diet, the weight loss medication edition. And you may recognize her also as the host of the podcast Mayo Clinic on Nutrition. Welcome, Tara.
Hi, Dr. Chen. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad we're having this conversation. I so many times wish that I can just spend an entire clinic visit, dedicated to talking about nutrition with my patients. And I was just hoping we can just summarize all that in one podcast. And here we are.
Let's do it.
And this is going to be super fun because it's host-on-host discussion. So we'd just love to get to know you a little bit, Tara. What is your work like as a dietitian? How often do you work with older adults? And what are the common issues that you see in this population?
So the beginning of my career, I was in the outpatient setting and seeing mostly patients with obesity. So I saw older adults who were considering bariatric surgery. I saw many older adults in cardiac rehab. Yeah. And the challenging part with older adults is that they have lower calorie needs, but higher, if not the same in some cases, nutrient needs. So we're trying to fit more stuff into a smaller box. So food choices can be really important, but also you get to an age where you're like, I'm blank years old. Yeah. I'm going to do whatever I want.
Right.
So there's a really fine balance between how do we optimize nutrition and when is it important to do so? And that's always why we have a conversation one-on-one to see where someone is and is it necessary or even is it worth it?
Yeah, because things change and then oftentimes it becomes more challenging, like you mentioned.
And there's so many factors that influence someone's nutrition or nutrition factors that influence someone's life. I've spoken on this topic before, and I have this slide of all these moving arrows, right? Of a medication can influence your nutrition, but your nutrition may cause you to be on a medication. And what if you have side effects? And what's your living situation? And what's your food preferences and your food availability? It's a million things, to be honest.
And so I think people really appreciate it better when they understand the why behind things. It's about understanding, okay, why is our body changing? And then how can we adapt to these changing needs? So we know that nutritional needs change with time because obviously our physiology changes. And so the way it relates with food is also different. So I was hoping we could start by breaking it down. First of all, how does the body change with each decade? And therefore, how do our nutritional needs change too? Obviously kids need healthy nutrition as well, but when we move into our 20s and every decade after, our metabolic rate slows down.
Unfortunately.
I know. Feeling that right now.
I'd love that 20-year-old metabolic rate.
And the rate that we break down food also incrementally decreases, which can influence our appetite as well. So how do you address that change in metabolic rate and appetite in a way that's sustainable for each person?
I think it's important to talk to the patient about what stage of life they're in and how things need to adapt. So I'll even hear from patients who have gained unintentional weight, and they'll tell me, but Tara, nothing has changed in their habits. And I'll say, okay, maybe, unfortunately, that's the problem. I say it much more eloquently than that. But if nothing has changed, but you are aging, you will need to either decrease your calorie intake or to exercise more if you don't want to see that very gradual, sneaky, rude weight gain. So we have to take into account, okay, when I go from high school to college, I'm typically no longer a 3-sport athlete, and maybe alcohol has come into the picture. When I go from my 20s to 30s, I've got a lot more responsibilities. Maybe my job is different, or I have kids at home, and you might need to change a thing or two. And that's okay.
And that influences how we live and our relationship with food. Because as a busy mom of 2, there's only so many hours of the day. And so there's only so many chunks of those hours that you're able to eat well.
Yes.
And then into our 30s, we're dealing with a different decade now where The research is suggesting we're losing up to 5% of our muscle mass every decade. And so our needs change there as far as strength and function. So how can diet help us slow down that loss and maintain muscle mass? What's the secret sauce there?
It's not all diet. You can eat as much protein as you want, but it's not just going to go directly to your biceps or your quads or whatever muscle group you're working on. You have to challenge those muscles in order to build or stop the breakdown of those muscles. So that actually switches a little bit over to the exercise part of the equation. So I'll tell people you need to have adequate protein, but more than that, we need to be strength training. When it comes to true muscle building, right? Like you actually need to have those tiny little tears in your muscle in order to build, or maybe we're just talking about maintaining. Protein's important. We need enough of it, but we got to do the work to actually challenge those muscles, right? Are you pushing? Are you pulling? Are you lifting? Whatever it may be.
That's a really good reminder. And when it comes to our protein needs, I hear different recommendations. There's the 1 gram per kilogram recommendation. There's the 1 gram per pound. What's your recommendation there?
There's a range. So we do it in a few different ways. Sometimes an easy way to think about it is macronutrient distribution. So the macronutrients that give us calories are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Alcohol, we're not going to talk about. Water is a 0. So when we talk about protein, we'll say it's important to get 20 to 30% of your calories coming from protein, if you want to look at it like that. The general guideline for protein is 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So you can also use 1. That's close enough. So if you want to find out your protein needs in an average person, this does not work for everyone, of course, but you can take your weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2. Now you've got your weight in kilos, and let's just make that your protein needs because it's 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. But when we talk about protein in older adults, we actually bump that even higher.
Right.
But that number can be skewed if you have excess weight. We don't want to feed fat cells per se. So that's where dietitians come into play. You can also just make sure to have about a quarter of your meal a protein source, right? So if you're familiar with the plate method or the My Plate, it's 25% of that pie graph. But generally speaking, if you're eating off of a plate, can you have that protein source be about the size of your palm or 25% of your meal? But ideally at all 3 meals, which we're not always great at in America, but also if you're an older adult who may have a piece of toast and a cup of black coffee, like at least put some milk in your coffee. Give me a few grams there, please.
I like the way that you've simplified things. We can do that throughout those next few decades into our 40s and 50s, prioritize protein, keep our muscles active without wasting away.
Absolutely.
But then into our 60s, our hormones change. We need more calcium needs. Women, after post-menopause, they start to develop more bone loss and osteoporosis. So then in those decades, we're dealing with more nutritional needs like bone density health. And although we can't completely reverse it, there's ways we can improve it. How do you guide your patients to focus on bone health in those decades moving forward?
We're strength training again. You're probably going to hear me say a lot. And I know that that's not necessarily a dietitian thing.
It's good to be a broken record on the things that are important. Yeah.
Yes. And this is often a population that didn't necessarily grow up strength training, especially depending on your sex. Maybe you're not comfortable with it or you don't want to go to the gym, and it doesn't have to be barbells or dumbbells or broing it up in front of the mirror. But we need to do something. And there are plenty of bodyweight exercises. There are plenty of seated exercises. You can do a push-up on the wall. Don't make me do a push-up on the floor off my knees. I can only do one of those. So there are many, many ways to strength train, but that's a huge one for bone health. And like you mentioned, getting in adequate intake of calcium and vitamin D. Dairy is obviously a really excellent source of that, but if you're not a dairy person, there is some in our green leafy vegetables, some in beans, tofu, or even think about making things with dairy that you won't taste it. So if you don't want to drink a glass of milk, that's okay. But can you make your instant oatmeal with milk instead of water? Can you make your tomato soup with milk? That's delicious. Can you make a smoothie with milk? So even incorporating dairy or yogurt into these things to get you those more concentrated sources of Calcium and vitamin D, no one wants to eat that many beans.
I feel bloated just hearing about that. And how about the supplements? You mentioned concentrated calcium for people who can't eat a lot of dairy or ice cream or yogurt. What's the recommended over-the-counter calcium supplements?
It depends on the patient, right? So I may have someone who comes into my office and they say, I drink a glass of milk with every meal, and I also enjoy these vegetables, and I make my smoothie every morning with yogurt, etc., and they're doing okay. Or there may be someone who is a vegan, and I'll check if they're getting any fortified sources of those, or someone who absolutely hates milk. When it comes to vitamin D, where do they live, right? How much sunlight are they getting? So we really prefer to have that supplement conversation one-on-one. And as a dietitian, you'll hear me often say, I'd love you to get this from food first. And if you're missing some, then we'll supplement. That's literally where the word supplement is coming from.
There's a reason why it's called a supplement and not the main source.
Yes.
Let's talk about absorption. As our bodies age, absorption can change, and that can be partly related to the medication that we're on, but also just having those general health issues can make things even harder. What is happening in the body here? Like, what causes absorption difficulties?
A lot of times it can be related to things like stomach acid. So there are very, very common drugs that decrease stomach acid, and that's kind of what their purpose is. But that stomach acid is needed for nutrient absorption. Or there are drugs that decrease absorption that's happening in the GI tract, or drugs that impact the gut microbiome, which can impact nutrients. Some categories of drugs increase excretion through the urine. And then there's a whole heck of a lot of drugs that simply alter our intake, right? So two very common ones would be like an SSRI, antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, and GLP-1, very common. Both of those impact our hunger sometimes and our thirst. So now we're just not necessarily feeling thirsty or feeling hungry. That's impacting the nutrients that we would have been getting from food.
Yeah, I think whenever I see just a list of polypharmacy, I assume there's probably going to be some sort of problems with absorption. There's probably going to be some interactions in there somewhere. And then we already covered the protein. In terms of the other macronutrient needs, what other things come into play? Fiber needs, healthy fats, and others. Can you break that down for us?
So a few of the key nutrients in older adults, we mentioned protein, of course. I really like to encourage a wider variety of protein so that we can get more nutrients, like different amino acids and maybe different fats, and maybe there's some iron in some, right? So we don't eat singular foods, we don't eat singular nutrients. You can think of each food, no pun intended, like coming to the table with its own benefits. The wider variety of fruits and vegetables to different grains, especially to different proteins, are bringing more and more nutrition. So people can have habitual eating habits, of course, but I love to challenge them with, can we do fish once a week and red meat once a week if you choose to do that? Have you ever tried a meatless meal? How are you doing with beans? Have you ever tried tofu? Just to get the different nutrients. You mentioned fiber, which is a big one for older adults. Technically, the needs of an older adult in terms of recommended daily allowances is lower for this population, but we've never told anyone to eat less because 95% of America is not getting enough. So we kind of just ignore that caveat and just tell everyone to eat more fiber. Because if we can increase fiber sources, fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, whole grains, we often decrease discretionary calories or empty calories. So if I can bump up your nutrition with all the good things I just listed, you don't often have as much room for fun, less healthy calories. We need to match our fiber with our fluid. So I'm sure we'll be talking about fluid as well. And we're not encouraging necessarily a high fiber diet, but we're encouraging more because almost our entire population needs more.
Absolutely. I think constipation is a very common issue among older adults as the gut slows down. I wish there were more foods that had a dual purpose, like high protein, high fiber. And I feel like beans is the only thing I can think of in that category.
Other than like ultra processed foods that like have those labels on them. And I'm like, I don't really want to get that from like a weird chip. I want to get that from a real food.
Agreed.
B12 is another one. The recommended daily allowance is not necessarily higher, but it's one that absorption decreases as we age. That is one actually that we sometimes will encourage supplementation of in older adults, especially if they're not able to get it from food alone. So sometimes they'll say supplements or fortified food should make up at least half of your B12 intake. We've also got B6 we'll need more of. We talked about calcium and vitamin D as well.
I have a lot of patients who tell me I just can't eat well or much because things just don't taste good anymore. Their senses have changed. They can't smell. And we know that taste is influenced by our senses, which unfortunately impacts the amount of food that we can consume. So what are some strategies that you use to accommodate for that smell and taste loss?
Those are both decreased as we age, which is sometimes why you'll see people overly salting their food simply to get some kind of flavor. So we really talk about becoming comfortable with herbs, with spices, with lemon juice, with different ways to really bring out the flavors of those foods. We talk about making the food environment really enjoyable, right? Like, let's not sit on the couch or like stand with our cupboard open, which I'm absolutely guilty of doing. Let's sit down. Let's have a placemat. Let's have a napkin. Let's ideally have some socialization. That can be a huge one for older adults in having a communal meal. Finding the types of food flavors, the types of food textures. Maybe it's different foods that they're not familiar with. Maybe it's spicy food. Maybe it's sour. And really kind of just playing around with that flavor profile so that it can be more enjoyable, because no one wants to have bland food. What's the point?
Food needs to be enjoyed. I completely agree. So my father is 86, almost 87. And over the past 5 years, we always gave him just a hard time because he would always put extra soy sauce in his dishes. And we're like, well, Dad, this already tastes pretty good. And then he'll have his own little pile where he'll just pour on all the soy sauce. And luckily, he doesn't have heart failure or high blood pressure. But now we're just like, you know what? This is how he likes his food, and he'll eat it better, and he enjoys it better.
And we'll be talking, I think, about what are the risks and the benefits of him having more soy sauce, right? So you just said he doesn't have high blood pressure. He's not in heart failure. So what's the harm, right? And even if he did develop a little bit of high blood pressure, would we control that with a medication and just let him do his thing with the soy sauce? It's very complex, right? This is not like a soy sauce is high in sodium and sodium is bad. It really is individualized. Like we cannot give overly broad nutrition advice because there's going to be multiple people out there that it just doesn't apply to.
Agreed. But let's expand that a little bit more, where someone who does have perhaps bad hypertension or diabetes and they have to restrict everything that they eat, they can't have too much of this and that, and things get very bland. How do we find that balance of the taste loss plus the restricted diet and then exploring the right goals of care, I guess?
So we really do talk a lot about their current health status, and maybe it's a little bit scary, but we talk about life expectancy and we talk about the goals of care. So a lot of times we'll be more lenient with some guidelines, like sodium or like A1C guidelines, blood pressure guidelines, because if we think about what we're doing a lot with nutrition when we're younger is we are preventing future complications. I don't want my prediabetes to develop into diabetes. Well, if you have prediabetes and you're 87, like, are we really worried about it that much? Right? And I mean that in a very serious way. Your life expectancy and also your quality of life is likely a bigger factor than like, hey, your A1C is a little bit out of range. So we really do have that conversation with the patient and maybe their family, their caregiver, to say, okay, is it risky if they do this, are they risking a fall? Are they risking a stroke? Are they risking a higher A1C? And some of those, of course, have more risk to them than others. So we look at that really big picture and say, is it neutral? Is it helpful? Or is it harmful? And sometimes it's a mix. But your father's a great example of like, you know what? This is actually probably helpful and seems to be neutral on his health. So let's just do it. We also have to think about the totality of what they're eating. So if someone selects a very high sodium item or meal, but that's the only meal they're going to eat that day, the math doesn't really math. Yes, this individual item is high and may have been a red flag previously, but if that's all they're going to eat that day, we actually are nowhere near the maximum threshold that we want to do. So maybe we split it up between meals and we add other foods. It's always also important to say, okay, let's not vilify individual items. We have to look at what this person is eating across a 24-hour period.
Right.
No one's going to tell me not to eat cake when I'm 98. Don't come at me.
Exactly. For older adults who are overweight from metabolic slowing and just wanting to lose weight, but in order to do that, we got to go through caloric restriction. But then with that, there's a risk of muscle mass loss. And it's just this vicious, how do I even get out of this stuck phase, you know?
The first question I'm going to ask is, do we need to lose weight? And we can talk about all of the impacts, of course, of comorbidities related to excess weight. But in the practice of geriatrics, we more often throw out that BMI chart thing and we talk about usual body weight. So we'll say, okay, tell me about your usual body weight. And I'd like my patients to have stability-ish, right? So I want to avoid drastic increases in their weight, but I also want to avoid drastic decreases. There was a meta-analysis of mortality in older adults. So this sweet spot, kind of this safe spot or the best spot for BMI in older adults was around 27 to 28.
So just for our listeners, the reason why BMI of a little bit higher is safer for older adults is because when it's too low of what we consider normal BMI of 18, if it's too low below that, then there's a higher risk of muscle wasting, muscle loss, and less resilience when you recover from acute illnesses. But we also don't want a BMI of too high either because there's a risk of diabetes and hypertension and obesity-associated problems. So we try to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to BMI range.
And then there's even a newer study that kind of broadened that range to, okay, we don't necessarily want to be less than 25 on a BMI scale, but we don't want to be more than 35. That's where we have decreased muscle strength. That's where fall risk comes, gait or balance problems. Malnutrition can be in someone who's underweight or someone who has excess weight. So oftentimes I'll have older patients come and say like, I want to lose 5 pounds, I want to lose 10 pounds. And I'll look at their weight and we'll talk about their history of their weight or their history of dieting. And most of the time I'm like, you're good, ma'am. You're okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to optimize your nutrition, which I would love you to do, and increase your nutrient-dense food choices, increase your healthy food choices, and in turn, decrease those discretionary calories like we talked about, you might lose a few pounds. Or we'll talk about exercise. Let's strength train. Let's get you moving. You also might lose a few pounds. So I would rather the weight loss be a second little prize to the changes that you made in your lifestyle.
So we went down this path of talking about people's specific health issues and diet. And I want to go back to what we were talking about before when eating just feels like such a chore. So for example, chewing and swallowing can get more difficult as we age, and that can mean some people need to eat a lot more pureed foods. The textures can be different. What do you recommend to your patients to help them adjust to this change?
So you would undergo a swallow study, and that swallow study will then essentially tell you what's safe for you. Yeah. Are thin liquids safe for you? Are crunchy foods safe for you? And then there's this level system that dietitians use to say, this category and above or this category and below are the most safe foods for you. Your foods need to be blended. Your liquids need to be thickened, etc.
It makes the eating experience less enjoyable, I'd say, because now you're eating pre-ground up food, which obviously can impact the taste. and I just don't want to eat my steak as steak mush, but sometimes we just have to make those accommodations to make sure people aren't at risk of aspiration.
These are not guidelines we take lightly. These are always aspiration risk guidelines that we're using to keep people safe. And we're doing a lot with hospital food service to make that food as appealing as possible. So it'll be pureed peas, but they make them into tiny little peas, or they plate things very beautifully. We make sure that you, as much as possible, get the same meal experience, even though your texture may be modified. And when it's safe, ideally you can have another swallow study and graduate, let's say.
I didn't know they do that. That's really nice that they would try to make it as food-like as possible.
Yeah, so there's molds now, especially in hospital food service or nursing homes, assisted living. They're doing a lot with dysphagia diets to try to optimize that experience, because no one wants just like 3 blobs on their plate.
So you mentioned earlier about hydration. Let's come back to that topic. How much should we be drinking? I feel like it's more of an issue in older adults because now they're urinating more and their bladder health is involved. So how do we help people stay hydrated in older age without risking other problems?
Any beverage is fine. I think when we talk about hydration guidelines in this, 2 liters or 8 cups, 64 ounces, whatever it may be, people typically picture water. And that's great. I've got nothing bad to say about water. People should probably be drinking more. But when it comes to older adults, especially who are experiencing that decreased thirst, any beverage is great. Do you like tea? Drink some tea. Do you want to have a glass of milk? Fabulous. I just got you protein and calcium and vitamin D and a little bit of B12. We're doing great. Another tip is to not rely or wait for thirst, because it might just not be there, right? So instead of I'll drink when I feel thirsty, to just throw that out the window and be drinking with meals, with snacks. Do you have a water bottle in the car? Do you have something next to your bed? Do you have a cup of coffee or tea with you in the bathroom in the morning when you're getting ready? And there's also foods, of course, that are hydrating. So when we actually look at the guidelines for hydration, it includes high water content foods. So fruits and vegetables, of course, we're going to plug here. More than 75% water, but also, do you like a soup? Do you like a smoothie? And I would ask you, should we be bringing up any issues with our bladder? I wouldn't want someone nutritionally to limit their fluid intake because of a bladder-related symptom. So I would want to make sure that they talk to their PCP or their physician about any bladder symptoms, because those may be able to be resolved with the medication in some cases. But I would never want, I'm not drinking because I don't want to deal with the side effect of whatever's happening.
That's important, I think. And most of the bladder issues tend to be nighttime anyway. They're getting up a lot to urinate. And so the timing makes a big difference. Don't drink after 7 p.m. Make sure you empty your bladder completely and get all your hydration needs beforehand. And I smile a little bit when you mentioned earlier, drink anything that you want, because when I do advise my patients to drink more, they're like, oh, well, does beer count?
Oh, okay. I wasn't talking about that one.
Everything in moderation. Let's talk about resources. I like to try to keep things simple. If you could give like an elevator pitch of some sort, what would you say is just a healthy, balanced diet for an average older person, where if they just stuck with that diet every day, what would that look like?
I like the MIND diet. Everything's an acronym, especially at Mayo, of course. Mediterranean, because it's a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. Intervention for neurodegenerative delay. So this is essentially a diet that has been shown to be protective against Alzheimer's development, Parkinson's, slower cognitive decline, reduced rates of cognitive impairment, and then even lower risk of all-cause mortality the closer you get to adherence to this diet. But it's nothing complicated. It's what you think healthy nutrition is. High in fruits and vegetables, especially leafy greens, especially berries. We've got beans. We've got healthy fats like olive oil. We've got whole grains. Seafood is part of it. And then on the opposite side of what we're limiting, I did not say avoid, I said limit, red meat, high-fat dairy, so butter, cheese, pastries and sweets, fried food, fast food. It's not overly complex, but it has a heck of a lot of research behind it, as do the Mediterranean diet, which was a little bit more focused on cardiac health, and then the DASH diet, which is more focused on blood pressure and reducing hypertension. So it's actually a combination of both of those.
Do you have any resources on how people can maintain this diet? Because it seems like it's harder to prepare and make and get the fish, and it's just the complexity of actually taking the time to prepare. And what tools would you recommend there?
This doesn't have to be a complex food preparation 8-hour Thanksgiving day thing. It can be if you want it to be. If you love to do that, I love to do that. That's great. But you don't have to fly your salmon in from Alaska. You can also get a can or a pouch of tuna or salmon. You do not have to get kale from the farmer's market. You can get a bagged salad in your produce aisle. If you don't want to cut up a mango, because those little suckers are slippery, you can get a bag of chopped frozen mango in the freezer section. So there's always a way. I'm okay with minute brown rice. Someone just parboiled it before they put it in the box. I'm okay with that because guess what? I just got you the fish and the fruits and the veggies and the whole grain, but I didn't do the 3-hour thing of preparing those. And those items, even if they are, let's call it one step lower in quality or possibly nutrition, which I kind of disagree with, than the optimal items, I still got you to eat them and they're better than what you were going to do before. So just baby steps. Get a bag salad. I don't make salad from scratch. I don't have time for that.
I love
I dump it in a bowl.
This is great. And this is why we need dedicated talks and, clinic visits on nutrition, because I think it's these ideas that we need to discuss with people, because otherwise it's just hard for them to figure out, how do I do this sustainably, affordably? And I love these little options that you just presented here.
Some people think they have to do nutrition perfectly. And if it's not going to be perfect, then I might as well go to fast food. And I'm like, wait, hold on.
Right.
Like, we can get a B+ and not get an F. A B+ is pretty darn good. I'll take a B+ any day. Anything in the right direction is in the right direction.
Yeah. That's a great reminder. Thank you for that. And for people who are at risk for undernutrition, because there are a lot of folks who live in these food deserts, they may have mobility issues, have troubles getting to the grocery store, and perhaps food is more expensive. Do you have any resources for people who may be food insecure and how they can prioritize good nutrition?
So Meals on Wheels has a fabulous reputation. That is through the Older Americans Act. That has been associated with reduced use of healthcare services and therefore cost, reduced nursing home use, reduced or slowed decline in nutritional risk, social isolation goes down, falls go down, home safety goes up, food security goes up, and diet quality goes up. We also have the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, Child and Adult Care Food Program. These all have acronyms, of course. OAA, again, Older Americans Act Congregate Nutrition Program, OAA Home Delivered Nutrition Program. There's a lot out there, but I don't think people always know. I think it's more about making your resources known. And maybe that's a social worker that you can have a conversation with. Those are the people who know about these resources.
And I guess every community is different. Yes. Not every place has the Meals on Wheels, or I think there's like Mom's Meals. There's another.
Yes. And there's local churches in our town that you can just show up and it doesn't matter how old you are. And you can get nutrition.
So there's 2 questions we like to end our podcast with. And the first one is to get to know you a little bit better, Tara. As a nutritionist and a dietitian, what does aging forward mean to you? And how do you like to personally do that?
It means balance to me. You'll find that I'm not a very hardcore nutrition kind of person, and there are those people out there, but I'm more of a balance kind of gal. I exercise, but I take a rest day when I need it, when I'm sore or I'm too busy or just I need a rest day, right? I eat well, but I do go to margaritas with my girlfriends once a month. I shared an ice cream with my husband and my children because the ice cream truck came to our park. And you know how special that is when you're a little kid. I get good sleep, but sometimes I binge a book or a Netflix series, right? And I pay for it the next day. I'm not rigid in anything because I think that rigidity would actually be more detrimental to me than an occasional ice cream cone or an occasional margarita with my very best friends, because that is really what I needed. And I'm not condoning alcohol. I don't think there's anything nutritionally beneficial about alcohol. But it wasn't about that, right? I'm a lot more about big picture. One salad is not going to cause you to lose 5 pounds, and one cupcake isn't going to cause you to gain it, right?
Do you have a parting question that you can leave for our listeners? Perhaps something you'd like to ask them to consider in their lives as they move forward? Any habit changes or lifestyle changes that can really optimize their nutrition and well-being?
I always talk to people about their pattern of eating. So I get hammered with questions. Is blank good or bad for you? Should I do X or should I do Y? I heard that this is bad, so I'm not going to do it anymore. Especially related to individual foods, individual nutrients, individual ingredients. But we don't eat in a vacuum. We don't eat singular foods. We don't eat singular nutrients. So before you go down the Google rabbit hole of is blank good or bad, I want you to take a step back. You honestly probably know the answer. Anytime a family member texts me about a new trendy nutrition or wellness thing, I want to say, like, what would your gut tell you? Or what would your first grader tell you? Kids are a really wonderful example of not having been influenced by the media into blank is good and blank is bad.
They're so honest. They're just like, that sounds weird.
Like, would you tell a child that bananas are too high in sugar? Of course you wouldn't. It's a banana. If every kid right now ate 2 bananas, I'd be thrilled for the world. So before we jump down assumption, media, very interesting New York Times article titles, take a step back and look at your pattern of eating. What do you do on the regular? I'll ask people, okay, you're asking me about a food, but I want to hear how often you have that food and how much, because that's what really counts.
This is such a fun conversation. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Chen. It's been a pleasure.
So that's all for this episode. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more informed, inspired, and empowered. On the next episode of Aging Forward, updates on Alzheimer's disease, understanding the disease, and what's on the horizon.
Right now, the Alzheimer's Association estimates there's about 6.9 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease. And that number, without a more potent intervention, is expected to double every 20 years if we don't do something about it.
If you have a topic suggestion for a future episode, you can leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we might even feature your voice on the show. For more Aging Forward episodes and resources, head to mayoclinic.org/agingforward. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on your podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious and stay active.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.